what has happened with the meeting. It was a White House Correspondents' Dinner at
Right.
Washington Hilton Hotel. And what's something strange? Someone came in, penetrating these layers of security and shooting at the participants of the event. And here is what one of the, you know, a witness of what has happened. She's just explaining what has happened during that event.
From me to that building, and there was a security guy there too. I mean, I don't think anyone knew what he was doing.
Describe him. What did he look like?
I'm not even sure what he looked like.
And what made you think he's the shooter? How do you know he's the guy?
I saw him put the gun together and start shooting.
Oh my God.
Yes, I mean, he put it together and started and ran towards the stairs to go down to the ballroom.
Who did he shoot? In what direction did he shoot? What did he shoot?
I don't know what he shot. It just seemed like he was shooting all over the place.
Larry, putting gun together, it remembers Tyler Robinson putting the gun together.
Yeah, well, I don't know what she's talking about, because the reports that were put out said he had two types of firearms. He had a shotgun, which you don't need to put that together. It can be disassembled, but that's not an easy process of just pressing a button and it comes apart. And he carried a semi-automatic pistol. It's called a 380. That's the caliber. Again, where did he? She implies that it was a long gun. There's a CCTV footage of him coming. He runs down a hallway, and then you see him sprinting past the security guards, and then you see them draw their weapons and start firing in his direction. But you don't see you'd see a long gun. I mean, that's not easy to hide. So we're not seeing that. So that's what sort of puzzles me. So it appears that he had just the handgun, and that's what was fired. But just lots of odd things, because how did they take him down? We got no footage of that, and I guarantee you they got footage of that, but they're not showing it. He wasn't shot. Now, if he's carrying a firearm and if he's firing a firearm with all of those Secret Service personnel and then supplemented by police, he should have been lit up like a Christmas tree. I mean, they should have filled him with so many holes. He would have, he could have done Swiss cheese advertisements. But he wasn't shot. He didn't have any visible gun wounds. When the picture they show of him when he's handcuffed laying on the ground, there's both a picture from the front and then a longer distance shot from the side. There's no blood coming out. You don't see any. Nobody's provided. You don't see an EMT or one of the police officers with rubber gloves on doing first aid. You don't have that. And some say, well, maybe he could have been shot in the leg. Again, if he's shot in the leg, you're going to have a tourniquet on, and you're going to be providing medical treatment. There was no medical personnel around him. They're just letting him, lie there on the ground. It looks like they stripped him completely naked, which is why he's laying there, and then he's got this silver emergency blanket over him. So those are the odd things about. People were apparently there were shots fired. We know that at least 6 to 8 shots fired. Where did the bullets go? And again, I'm not suggesting that this was, quote, staged. Orchestrated is the better word. Because when you say staged, it sounds like you're suggesting it was not real. No, it was real. And I believe this guy was the real deal. But then you get into did he come up with this on his own? Or did he have somebody encourage him to do this and help him prepare to do this? I think it's the latter. Just by virtue of the fact that his decision to travel cross country on train carrying a shotgun and this handgun as opposed to flying. Well, if you fly, you would have had to fill out paperwork, and you would have had to, lock the cases, lock the gun case, and both for the handgun and the shotgun, and it would have been in the belly of the aircraft. On Amtrak, on the train coming across country, you don't have to do that. And that's one of the real security gaps still in the U.S. transportation system. You can get on a train and you can have a concealed weapon on you, and nobody's going to know the difference until you get it out and start shooting. So, who maybe, he thought it, came up with it on his own. Hey, I should probably take the train instead of the plane. But then good Lord, that's a good solid 2-day journey. Maybe they can get it done in 24 hours cross country on train, but that's an arduous trip. And but then the real thing that caught my eye, when all of this shooting starts, the very first person that's taken off stage is J.D. Vance. And you're going, what? Look, Secret Service job is to protect the president. Okay? They also protect the vice president, but the number one guy to protect is the president. So as soon as you hear gunshots, they grabbing his ass and hauling him out of there is what should have happened. That did not happen. After J.D. Vance, from the time that they grab J.D. Vance and start him off stage, 20 seconds pass before the Secret Service grabbed Trump and start moving him. And what's interesting is when the shooting starts, Melania reacts with horror, and Trump's just like looking at her. Trump's not, he's been shot at before. You think he'd be flinching? He's not flinching. It's almost like he knew this was going to happen. Did he know? I don't know. But his reaction was strange. And then that of the Secret Service detail for him it just didn't follow protocol. So, I think when they look at this in retrospect, that the Secret Service failed on several counts. One, how did this guy get past the checkpoint with a firearm? And because you say, well, he ran through it and they didn't stop. Look, one of those, if you got a security checkpoint with metal detectors and people have to come through and put their belongings down and get checked, you also, as part of the planning for that, you step back and say, okay, we're going to have some additional screeners there that if you have to pull somebody aside, they can use a hand wand and check them out. And then you got at least two additional people who are carrying like a short-barreled rifle and can stand there. And the effect is that in the event someone actually tries to run through, breach it, they can stop them with deadly force, or they can at least tackle them. But if you've seen somebody with a firearm, my understanding from talking to a friend of mine who ran Ronald Reagan's Secret Service detail, that if someone's got a gun and they're anywhere in the vicinity of the president, you shoot them. You don't ask questions. You don't tell them to stop, drop your weapon. None of that. You shoot them. That they've got that rule of engagement, which is they can use deadly force without fear of prosecution in that case.
I think if it was orchestrated, as you just mentioned, what is the main objective of that in your opinion? What do they want from this?
So there could be a number of explanations. One explanation is, let's say that this was orchestrated with Israel wanting to remind Trump that, hey, if you don't do what we say, we can get you. Another assassination attempt. Another possible explanation. Trump wanted to use this, as he did in the subsequent press conference, as an excuse, as justification for building the ballroom, the new ballroom at the White House. Now, look, this had nothing. The security failure, the fact that this could happen, had nothing to do with the construction of the building. It had to do with the failure of the Secret Service to follow proper procedure. Now, let's also acknowledge, though, the shooter did not, the system ultimately worked. The shooter did not get into the ballroom. The shooter did not kill anybody that was in attendance, as it was his stated intention. So even though the Secret Service failed to fully follow protocol, what system they had in place there still ended up working and preventing the president from being shot.
Yeah. It seems that I was using the wrong microphone here.
Oh yeah, you're back.
Every time we have to put I don't know what StreamYard is doing here, but it's so strange. By the way, every time we have to do this.
Yeah, you sound better now.
Yeah, it's better right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Larry, getting out of this sort of propaganda that is happening in Washington and Donald Trump's, he's putting all of us in some sort of, he's distracting us from what's going on in the Middle East. What is your understanding about these new sort of weapons that they're sending to the Middle East, basically to the UAE and Qatar? We've seen a lot of, cargo planes going there. What does that mean?
I don't know. Well, let's put it this way. Back when they first deployed assets into the Middle East, into the Gulf, that was about 60 days ago. In fact, let's see, today's the 27th, 31 days in March. That's 58, one day, 28th February. So, it's 59 days, almost 60 days. Normally, those initial deployments, they go out with 55 to 60 days of supplies. So the units that were deployed, what they're getting now are basically they're getting replenished, resupplied with what they've already used up. They're getting resupplied. I don't think, but saying that, there's not a lot of, it's not like they're bringing in more Patriot missile batteries and more THAAD missiles. They don't have them. I was, over the weekend, late last week, CNN put out numbers based upon talking to people at the Pentagon and some other government offices, that they said, for example, the Patriots, they used up 50% of the Patriots. That just doesn't make sense. It's much worse than that. And here's the math on it. That from 2015 to the end of 2025, they produced 4,620 of PAC-3 missiles. And now we're into month 4. We're coming into the end of April. So on average, let's give Lockheed Martin credit that they're producing 60 a month. So now they will have potentially 240 more. Well, of that 6,420, at least 1,000, and I believe it may have been closer to 2,000, almost a third of it, was sent in foreign military sales to other countries like South Korea and Japan and Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Then you had 1,000 that were used up in Ukraine. So, we're now down to 3,000, let's say 3,600. And a number of those PAC-3 missiles were used in the June 12th war. So let's say that's another 1,000 that was used. So now we're down to less than a third of the initial amount. So they're carrying whatever resupply. These planes are carrying whatever resupplies they can. But what the reality for the United States is, its precision strike missiles and these air defense systems are being depleted, and depleted very quickly. So I don't think there are any troops that are being ferried over there for a ground operation, for one reason. You look at the structure right now of Central Command. You have the commander for the aviation combined components, the general, Air Force general. You have a general or an admiral for the maritime components that are in there. And then they both report to the commander of CENTCOM, who's also called the Joint Force Commander. What are we missing? You don't have a ground force commander. There hasn't been one designated. So if you're going to use ground forces, you would have a ground force commander. So until we see that happen, that tells me there's not going to be any kind of ground operation, because the last thing you want is an admiral or an Air Force general directing ground operations. That, let's reverse that. Would you take an Army general that runs the, like Keith Kellogg, 82nd Airborne? Would you put him in charge of running an aircraft carrier? Hell no. He's not qualified to do, just because he's a general doesn't mean he's qualified to do that, because it requires knowledge of air operations off the deck of a carrier, for God's sake. So this is, I think a lot of this movement is replenishment, the resupply, but, they are prepared. They're putting in place all the assets to renew the conflict. What is unknown is the attitude of the commander of the ground force and the commander of the aviation component and the commander of the maritime component. If they are saying, oh yeah, man, we can do anything, let's go. My understanding is that both have registered strong, I don't want to call it protest, but they say that if we shouldn't renew the attack. We don't have the assets, and it's going to further deplete us, and we're not going to accomplish, there's no clear goals that we can accomplish. What remains to be seen is whether or not the Admiral Cooper, who is the Joint Forces commander, shares their sentiment and then passes it on to both Hegseth and Trump. So the way the chain of command works here is the commander of CENTCOM reports directly through the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of Defense to the President. General Kane, who is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he's the president's top military advisor per legislation, but he's not a decision maker in the chain of command. He's more like giving advice, and I don't think that's a good idea. I wouldn't do that, which is reportedly what happened. Was it a week ago, 2 weeks ago now, when they had that emergency meeting to decide how to proceed against Iran, and that's when the whole issue of using a nuclear weapon came up. And it was initially reported, the report I got was that he was, quote, wanting access to the codes, but that's not correct. What actually happened was Trump was beginning to raise and say, okay, we should explore the possibility of using a nuclear weapon to send a message to Iran. And General Kane said, no, and hell no, we're not going to do that. So that was, once word of that got out, Trump was ultimately, he made a point of saying, denying, oh no, we're not going to use nukes. So that's the good news. It appears that's off the table.
I think our assessment, we talked on Friday, and our assessment was that the war is coming and we should have had the second, round of war by now. That's why I think one of the main reasons that is not happening as we talk is because of this sort of new attitude on the part of generals in the United States. They're trying to give their assessment, to the President of the United States. Do you think that they're getting direct access to the president, or they're sending their message through Pete Hegseth or someone like him?
Well, no, so these generals, their official title. So you have the commander of Central Command, CENTCOM. Then under him, you got the Combined Forces Air Component Commander, which is the CFACC. That's the General Derek France, I believe is his name. And then you have the Combined Forces Maritime Component Commander, the CFMCC. So they report directly to Cooper. They don't go around Cooper. They don't call up Pete Hegseth and say, "Oh, we haven't told Admiral Cooper this yet," but no, they do follow the chain of command. So their views are presented to Cooper. It's up to Cooper then to present that to the Secretary of Defense, and then the Secretary of Defense is supposed to convey that to the President or the Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War. We've gone from SOD to SOW. That the Secretary of War can direct the commander of CENTCOM to communicate directly with President Trump.
Yeah. Larry, the negotiations and the talks, we had the Iranian foreign minister going to Islamabad and sending, in his first visit, he gave them a document, then he updated that. It seems that right now the basics for the negotiations are, they're talking about the Strait of Hormuz, how to reopen the Strait of Hormuz permanently. And the other point, I think, is the case of Lebanon is on the table right now. It's so much related to the Strait of Hormuz as it comes to the Iranian mind. And there is no sign of negotiations on nuclear program so far, because they're putting this forward. Let's talk about these issues, then go later on. We're going to have the talks on nuclear program of Iran. What is your assessment of the way that Iran is putting forward its points?
Well, Iran knows what it's doing and what it wants out of the negotiations. The United States does not. It's the Trump keeps talking about that there is confusion on the Iranian side, that they don't know who's in charge, that they don't agree with each other. All he is doing is describing what the reality is on the U.S. side, because on the Iranian side, it's quite clear who's in charge. Everybody has a role to play. And it was a Ghalibaf,
Ghalibaf.
Okay, Ghalibaf, the head of the legislature. He was the lead negotiator in the last round, but it didn't mean that Araghchi was being shoved aside. To the contrary, Araghchi remains the foreign minister and playing a very prominent role. And the notion that somehow the IRGC is calling the shots and Khamenei is out of the picture, that's not true. So, Araghchi went first, when he first went to Islamabad, was it last Friday or last Thursday, Friday, the expectation was that Witkoff and Kushner were going to jump on a plane, go over and meet with him, but he made it clear, no, I'm not here to meet with them at all. I'm here to talk to the Pakistanis. And so, again, reviewing with Pakistan, they basically gave them the same paper, the same 10-point document that had been presented 2 weeks previously, because it was read. When you read it again, it really hadn't changed anything. So that was for Pakistan to deliver that message to the West. And what was curious about that is Trump came out and said, "Oh yeah, they came back with we've had some movement. They're moving in the right direction." And they presented basically the same document. So Trump either wasn't remembering what they had read previously, or he was wanting to portray it in more positive terms now. Then Araghchi gets on a plane, flies to Oman, and has meetings with the sheikh there. Then he gets back on the plane. Originally, they said he was going to fly from there to Moscow or to Russia. But instead, he goes back to Pakistan. And again, the meeting between the two is described as very upbeat, very positive. But one of the things that comes out of it is Pakistan then basically downgrades security and lifts security restrictions, which is many interpreters said, okay, there aren't going to be any more negotiations right now in the foreseeable future with the United States, because with those security precautions eliminated, that means the U.S. wasn't coming. And then Arachi flew from there to St. Petersburg and is literally started his meeting with Putin about an hour ago. So it was and the opening comments were very warm and friendly between the two leaders.